Hello and welcome to the Nightfeed. I'm your host, Charlotte, here to bring you some comfort, camaraderie and conversation and keep you company during, let's face it, one of the toughest parts of being a new parent, the Nightfeed. Tonight's unpaid sponsor is pregnancy hormones. Picture this, last night I was cleaning the kitchen and the song Never Grow Up by Taylor Swift came on. If you don't know it, have a listen. Well, I was bawling my eyes out, crying into my sponge. And then I put it on repeat for some reason and just continued to cry and listen to the lyrics over and over. And it made me think, sometimes we just need a good cry. Now, as listeners, you might be pregnant maybe and thinking about breastfeeding, or you might be a brand new mum struggling with feeding, whether that's breast or bottle. And then there may be some of you a bit further along thinking about weaning or maybe struggling with a food aversion. So tonight I spoke to someone with some really interesting knowledge and advice on feeding and weaning. Laura is a feeding specialist with a specific background in speech and language therapy. And she shared some advice that no matter what stage you're at, I think you'll find really useful. So stay tuned as well for the breastfeeding story at the end, especially if that's something you're struggling with. Hi, Laura. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. Now, you reached out to me a few weeks ago with a really interesting message, and what you do is something I hadn't really heard of before, and I think it's going to be really interesting for our listeners today. So can you just start by telling me who you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. I am a feeding specialist and with a specific background in speech and language therapy. It's a very unknown part of the profession, and it's more the work that I do is around eating, drinking, feeding, swallowing difficulties, and it's from a what we call like a neurodevelopmental perspective. So you're looking at the whole child. How are they progressing neurologically, cognitively? What are they doing? And therefore, how can they engage in feeding from a physical, emotional, social perspective? So kind of looking at the whole picture of the child, really, which differs from all of the great work that dietitians and nutritionists would do, which looks at like what the child is eating more so. We're more how the child or the baby is feeding.
Yes.
And take that angle.
So it's a completely different approach, really. Like what I really liked, like you said when we spoke, is that it's from the child's perspective rather than what's the parent doing, what are they eating. It's taking a more scientific approach, isn't it, to how they eat kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
So what age do you work with?
So I can work from birth up, and I've even done some kind of education work from an antenatal perspective. So really working with families to prepare them for their feeding journey, all the way through the hiccups in the early stages of getting things like breastfeeding established, and then looking at and kind of unpacking what's going on if things are becoming more difficult to establish. So we'll be looking at what points do we change the feeding approach, or looking at why something isn't working so well and trying to resolve that issue so that feeding can become successful. And then beyond that, I will work pretty much all the way through childhood into adolescence, and that will be for more what we'd call kind of severe or pronounced feeding challenges, particularly around swallowing difficulties or like sensory preferences, where children are finding it more difficult to engage in the food that's in front of them.
Amazing. So the whole kind of the age range from birth to adolescence, it's amazing. I think with most of my listeners being brand new mums, I think what might be really helpful is maybe if we start with breastfeeding, touching on that a bit, and if you have any maybe advice or tips that you could give that you would give to a new mum that may be struggling with breastfeeding.
Yeah, sure. So where to start? So I think there is so much noise. I think the thing that I'd start with is the noise. I'd
Yeah.
like to take a making sure that you're emotionally feeling very well and supported.
Yeah.
There is so much noise about what to do, how to do it. And if you're not doing it, you're not doing it right. You're doing something wrong. It's you that's the problem.
Yeah.
I think try and block that noise out. Your body and your baby really does know what to do.
Yeah.
And if that's not going well, it's because there's something that needs addressing with a professional. And I would really go down that route.
Yeah.
So what I would say is really just take your time. You are both learning.
Hmm.
While you both know what to do, you need to give yourselves time, both you and your baby, time to feel your way and feel connected to each other. It's a
Yeah.
bonding experience and a communication experience just as much as it is a feeding necessity.
Yeah.
So allowing your child, your baby, to have time on you at your breast, playing, so lapping, sucking, nuzzling at your breast so that they can feel like they can find their way to you,
Yeah.
without you placing them in a certain position and hoping
Okay.
for the best, essentially.
Interesting.
One of the most amazing things that I just a wonder of this world that when your baby is born,
Yeah.
however they are born, that first contact skin to skin is really affirming for you both, not just from that connection and bonding, but it gives your baby an opportunity to find your breast. So have them on your chest, let them nuzzle. I call it a boob dive.
I
And
love
they'll
that.
nuzzle, yeah, they will nuzzle their way down. They know where to go.
Wow. It's
And they
incredible.
crawl their way down and will find a way to latch onto your breast
Wow.
if you give them the time and the space to do that. And if you're able to give them the time and the space to do that, obviously some
Yeah.
things can become more traumatic and complex. But if you can, it is just incredible. They will find their way. Um,
That's
and
amazing.
it's a beautiful thing to experience. So basically, just take your time, just
I
give
really
your
love that.
baby time.
I really love that advice from somebody who struggled with with breastfeeding, really struggled. For me, it was very much like what's the word? It was just very much put the baby on like it's almost a bottle. Like let them
Yes,
latch, put them on. This is how you
yeah,
should hold them. And I was shown maybe 3 holds so that I just rotated with them. But there was none of this take time, let them find it. There was kind of an urgency to get them on quick and
yeah,
get
yeah.
them feeding. And when you're both learning, like you say, we're both completely new to this, there
Hmm.
does need to be that air of they'll find their way, you'll find your
Yeah,
way, and
yeah,
don't stress. Because I think the more stressed you get and uptight about it, the baby can obviously
yeah,
sense that.
yeah,
And I think that's really good advice, actually, just to take your time,
yeah,
because nobody said that to me. It was very
yeah,
much your latch is wrong, you're holding the baby
yeah,
wrong. And I'm like,
yeah.
ooh.
Yeah, you've kind of gone through this world that it's all brand new. You're
Yeah,
exhausted. Your
yeah,
hormones are all over the place.
yeah, totally.
And then you've got all of this external pressure again. And then
Yeah,
what I find really alarming is there's so much pressure to do what you've described. And
mm,
as soon as it's not working,
yeah,
the advice is very quick to go, well, stop then. Let's just
yeah,
give them a bottle.
yeah,
And you think, hang on a minute, you've just put so much pressure on me to
yeah,
do breastfeeding, and now you're telling me not to when we've only tried it for a couple of days.
yeah.
It's very confusing.
Absolutely,
Um,
yeah. Because you do start to panic a little bit because obviously you're their main source of food. So you
yeah,
do kind of get that like, oh my God, I need to feed them. And
yeah,
the more, I think the more you panic, the more your milk supply struggles and you
yes,
struggle. And it's just really good advice to know that it's a natural process and it's okay to take your time and
yeah,
it will happen. It might not for
yeah,
everybody and that's
yeah,
completely fine, but not
yeah,
to stress yourself
yeah,
about it.
yeah. And
Yeah,
it will take weeks. It will take weeks
yeah,
really establish.
Yeah.
And that's for so many reasons. That's because your baby has, they've just entered the world. Like, if you
Yeah.
really take that into perspective, like how overstimulating that is,
Yeah.
and then they feel like they're still a part of you.
Yeah, cool.
And
Yeah.
when we think, oh well, they've only just fed, so they can't be hungry, but actually they don't know what they don't know, and they're taking a couple of milliliters at a time. So
Yeah.
that those first few weeks, that's why it feels relentless, because it is.
Yeah.
And
And they
you know,
cluster feed because of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and they're just learning, you're learning. And I think it's the societal expectation of bouncing back and doing all the housework and
Yeah.
making sure you're
Going back
going
to
out for
work for a
coffee,
lot of
going
women. Yeah.
exactly, especially in other countries where they don't have the benefit of the lengthy maternity leaves that we do
Yeah.
here.
Absolutely.
But actually, I wish somebody even told me, and I know this stuff, you expect to hibernate, essentially.
Yes, completely. It's the
You
fourth
just be
trimester, isn't
together.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Absolutely. No, it's absolutely true. And I saw a lady talking about a new mom, and she was only 3 months in. And she said it's really funny because she bottle fed her first baby and she decided
Mhm.
to breastfeed a second. And she said she was really shocked by getting to 3 months of breastfeeding and the amount of relatives and people in her life saying, oh, switch to bottle now, it's easier, switch to bottle. The baby's had 3 months of breastfeeding. She said the pressure I've had to switch has been mad. Whereas when I was bottle
Yeah,
feeding, no one said, switch to you should breastfeed. And there
yeah,
was no, and she said it's something wrong there with the pressure. Because
yeah,
she said she's happy that she bottle fed her first and she's happy that she's breastfeeding her second. But I thought it was quite interesting that as soon as the mum seems a bit tired or the cluster feeding, it's like, no, switch. You
yeah,
need to get on with things.
yeah,
And like you say, actually, we should be encouraged to know, hunker down and enjoy this time and take your time.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think what would be interesting now is to go into maybe the weaning process, if that's okay,
Yeah,
and any tips around that you have for people maybe starting that journey, because I know a lot of new mums will be thinking about that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, Again, time.
Yeah.
I'm all about taking your time.
Okay.
Um, I One of the things I say to people, because there's been over the last few years, weaning has started to get earlier and earlier and earlier,
Mm.
and there is kind of the standard 6 months um, kind of starting point. Wait until 6 months. Now, I what I feel a lot of people don't understand about that is that it's not just about just waiting for that time. It's not about the milk. It's about your baby being completely ready from that
Okay.
whole child perspective. So it's a target. There will always be variations in
Yeah.
ages. Some will need to wait a little bit longer. Some might be desperate to start a little bit earlier than that. But it isn't just about, oh, well, they wanted to eat they were showing interest in what I was, so I'm just going to give them what I'm doing.
Okay.
It's about them being able to sit steadily, because your whole body supports eating. It's not
Yeah.
just about what's going on in your mouth, how you're able to hold your tummy steady, your hips steady, your feet steady, so that you can support your neck to be steady, so
Right.
that you can support, and that gives your mouth an opportunity to concentrate. Often, if you start too soon, babies all wobbly, they
Mm.
can't concentrate on what's happening in their mouth because they're trying to keep themselves
Support their
still.
body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
that's one angle of it. Another angle is the baby's digestive system is designed to really, for that first 6 months, to only be able to digest milk.
Okay.
So if we throw too many things in there too soon, their body physically isn't ready to
Right.
process some more complex foods.
Okay.
So there are just some things to consider. You don't need to rush because of those things. Your baby's body needs to be ready,
Yeah.
not just their mind. But when you do start, again, start steadily.
Okay.
They will be eating forever. They will be eating forever. And I did some maths for a blog I was writing, and it's something like 90,000 meals or something around that on
Wow.
average everyone will eat. So
Wow.
it doesn't need to happen really quickly.
Yeah.
They're not babies forever. Just take your time. And when you are doing, but when you do start steady.
Okay.
Really give your baby an opportunity to explore just a couple of flavors at a time. You don't need to go straight for meals. Weaning is about learning to eat. It's not about how much they eat.
Okay. Yeah.
So
That's
having
an
that
interesting take.
mindset,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that's why it's okay, just a couple of tastes in the first few days, once a
Yeah.
day, then it builds up to two. And then you start adding in texture because they are learning how to eat. You start adding in soft finger foods because, again, they are learning what to do with the food. Because in that first year, from a nutritional perspective, milk is providing that.
Of course.
The
Yeah.
food is a complement to that, which means it doesn't matter if one day they have two mouthfuls and the next day they have 17. It is just about building that. And I
Okay.
think the more pressure you put on to eating, or the more you feel they should be doing, the
Yeah.
more resistance your baby is going to put
That's
in.
really, really interesting because I know that mums get a lot of pressure from older generations that'll say, oh, it used to be from 3 months. They need to eat. They need to. And there's almost this like pressure to wean earlier on, especially in this
Yeah,
country, I've found. But actually,
yeah,
what you're saying is take your time.
yeah,
It's okay. That
yeah,
it's just to complement the milk. We don't need
yeah,
to panic about 3 meals a day. And
yeah,
that's really interesting, especially for mums that maybe think, well, like you say, he had a whole bowl of baby rice yesterday and now he's not even touched the banana. It's like, ooh, is there something wrong? It's like, no,
yeah.
they're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And while
Yeah.
I'm not a dietitian would be able to talk about this a bit more. But what I do understand about babies' diets and their motivation is they're really, really good at moderating themselves. Not like us, where we have that societal understanding of
Yeah.
mealtime. So we think, oh, it's midday, I better have my
Best
lunch,
eat.
whether we're hungry or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Babies are really good at mapping what they eat over a series of days.
Wow.
So, like you say, if they've had a big bowl of baby rice to complement their milk one day,
Yeah.
they might be less interested the next. And you'll all feel like that now as you're with your children, and you think, actually, they ate loads yesterday. They're not eating much now. And the
Yeah.
next time they don't eat very much, look back over a course of a few days. Okay, well, what have they been eating?
That's really
And
interesting because my
yeah,
toddlers do that. They
yeah,
absolutely do that. And sometimes I am like, oh God, they've hardly eaten today. And then you realize actually over the week they've had a lot.
yeah,
So that's really interesting that they're able to do that. It's almost like they listen to their stomachs a lot more than we as adults do.
yeah, definitely. Definitely.
um, that's what I wanted to speak to you about actually. Food aversion.
Yeah, okay.
I've spoke to a few mums that I know that have struggled with this,
Mhm.
and they've almost kind of blamed themselves a little bit. Like, what am I doing wrong? What am I giving them that's wrong? And I think it'd be really
Okay.
interesting to hear your take on that.
So yeah, that it's an interesting one. It's a real challenge.
Yeah,
And emotionally, like, I just want to affirm those feelings that emotionally it is the pits. It
yeah,
feels really tough. Um, what I would say, which can feel a little bit kind of the flip side of what I've just said, is feeling those anxieties is more likely to make things worse.
okay,
So you what feel them in private because they are true and they are real, but really have to feel them in private because
okay,
children are incredibly intuitive to how we are presenting ourselves. And even if we think we are hiding something, we're not. It, and any of that desperation, I'll just have one more mouthful, just have one more mouthful, come on, like, just eat a little bit, all of that from a
yeah,
child is, you're putting pressure on me to eat, and I now don't want to do it.
yeah,
I think look at the mealtime and think about what is really happening. Look at what they are doing with the food. What do they engage with? And look at the positives. Um, Offer them less.
yeah.
Offer them a safer food. Like, always talk about safe foods. If there's a small repertoire of foods that they enjoy and feel comfortable and safe with, start there.
Okay,
Always offer those because the goal for me around food aversion is usually helping the child feel comfortable and able to eat.
Yeah.
And we can work on the rest later. If they approach every mealtime with, goodness me, what am I going to be faced with now?
Yeah.
In the hope that I eat something, they are going to be resistant. If they can predict what's coming, okay, I know that's what I'm going to have. I can eat that. I can manage that.
Yeah.
Mealtime, the social aspect of mealtime will get easier and easier and easier for all of you.
Right.
And then there is space to grow from there.
Yeah. I really like
Very
that safe
subtly.
food. Yeah, that's something I've not really, I mean, my girls definitely have those foods that they will go to, but I've never really thought about it in that context in terms of offering that if we're having something different, making sure that some
Yeah.
of that's on the plate, and then kind of, would you say, just slowly introducing other things if there is an
Yeah.
aversion? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And not even on the same plate.
Okay.
So we call it, in therapy, we call it a learning plate. And it is just like a very tiny saucer type sized plate.
Yeah.
And just putting one or two items of a new food that is similar to a safe food. So for example, if they're happy to eat, um, let's take a very easy example, chips.
Yeah.
If chips are a safe food, on that learning plate, I might put something like a potato waffle. The
Yeah.
goal is to work on adding variety, not making that a big colourful plate if the aversion is that severe. So a waffle it will look similar because it's a similar colour,
Yeah.
it's a similar texture, it smells the same. So you're looking at what are the qualities of that food, and then the child is learning how to be adaptable with the food in a
Okay.
safe way. We call that food chaining. So
Ah.
he's kind of combining two very well used and very well sort of used and generated therapy strategies into one,
Yeah.
and helping that child gradually adapt over time.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. I think sometimes I do that subconsciously, like with the waffle thing, it's like you do know that that's very similar and it's kind of safe. I mean, luckily, touch wood, mine would just go for a little bit phase. Now that when they were younger, they would kind of go for anything. And I think it's almost like an age thing. They almost learn the fussiness. Like Peppa
Yep.
Pig doesn't help, for example. George doesn't like tomatoes. And it's like, oh, great. Like,
Yeah.
thanks for that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's like a
And I think
psychological thing.
definitely, and it's really interesting that you say it's an age thing, because in a neurotypical developmental pathway, that is developmentally appropriate. So
Right.
there's a stage called the neophobic stage,
Okay.
which starts to kick in around 18 months. And it basically means fear of food, fear of new things. And
Right.
foods
Okay.
then is usually the center of that. And that's because they're becoming more cognitively advanced. They are more aware of what's in front of them, they're more aware of their communication skills, they're more aware that they can have some autonomy. Food creates such a big focus.
Yeah.
And that's why at that particular point, like that is the point, there's a really sensitive point that parents need to kind of watch out for, because you can go one way or the other
Yeah, of course.
depending on how you manage that stage. Some children will always be predisposed to have, because of sensory issues or whatever, to have
Okay.
an aversion, or they've had a medical issue like long-term reflux that's made food just feel like the enemy.
Mhm.
But for some children, if it's how you manage that neophobic stage when they do become more fussy,
Yeah.
naturally, really does map the path that they're
Wow.
going to be on. So just approaching that with calm, trying not to deviate too much, just keeping going with your routine, reduce the variety a little bit, but
Yeah.
not too much, keeping things very consistent and
Mhm.
predictable through that time. Because children are really, really great at getting attention, and they really don't mind a lot of the time what kind of attention that
Yeah.
is, whether it's positive, negative. I've got you. Food keeps parents on you. If you're not eating, what are parents doing? They are focused on you at the
Very
table.
true.
So
Yeah.
they can play it. It's a really really effective tool to play
Gosh, yeah, of
that attention
course. And like you said
situation.
earlier, it's how you manage that as the parent and
Yeah,
not getting like, well, you liked this yesterday, go on.
yeah,
That's only going to make it worse. So it's
yeah,
more just offering them something different, being calm and not bringing too
yeah,
much attention to that
absolutely.
food. Yeah, really
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
Now, you tell me you work for the NHS, but you also offer a private consultancy to mums
Yeah,
and
yeah,
families. So
yeah,
can you talk a little bit more about the kind of service you offer?
yeah, definitely. So yeah, I started Milk to Mealtime on a knee jerk, really, because there are just so many families that need kind of more instant support. I'm really proud of the work that I do for the NHS, and I feel that this complements that.
Yeah,
Um, Within the Milk to Mealtime offer, I will work with families from all through all stages. So whether it's wanting to get started with breastfeeding and just not, that kind of more general, I don't really know where to start. Can you hold
yeah,
my hand through that? Or whether it is talking through weaning stages, whether it's managing a more entrenched food aversion for a child that might have something like an autism diagnosis, for
yeah,
example. Um, and it really is like a coaching approach, because you, as the parent, are the vehicle to your child. We're
yeah,
not about changing the child per se. We're about how do we manage the environment and the setup that makes it possible for you both.
yeah.
And often that is coaching parents to be able to make those changes in their
Okay.
everyday. It's not like I spoke to a mum last week who was understandably very worried and anxious about her child not eating yet, and he was 16 months.
Yeah.
And well, what are you going to do to him to make him eat?
Mm,
Nothing. I'm not going to touch him. I'm not going to manipulate anything about him. We are going to create an environment that down the line will make him feel safe enough to eat
wow.
and help him to do that. So that's like our approach
Yeah.
to feeding, to eating. But I will also do a really in-depth assessment. So the thing that I really promote in our initial consultation is taking a deep dive through a child's history,
Okay.
whether that's they're a day old or 10 years old. We deep dive, we unpick all of the intricacies, and because I'm really looking for the root causes. Is there a medical stuff, even a really subtle medical issue that might have triggered something to not be right?
Yeah.
Is there something physical or motor that's going on? Is there something neurological in terms of like how the cranial nerves are communicating
Yeah.
with the
Wow.
muscles to make the swallow work? And we talk all that in those kinds of contexts. And then once I've got that information and I've either watched a video, because I have an online virtual offering, so you can send me videos and I can unpick that in a little bit more detail and then guide you through the next steps. Um, Sometimes I will go and do the bit of the firefighting. So we've tried all
Okay.
these things and nothing is working.
Yeah.
And I can do that at home if you're fairly local to me. We
Where are you
communicate.
based? Just
So
that.
my offering is kind of South Midlands,
Okay.
south of the West Midlands, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're Warwickshire, Worcestershire, Solihull,
Hmm.
that kind of area. But I am willing to travel
Yeah.
nearby to those areas. But yeah, like I say, the virtual offering I think is just as powerful, if
Yeah.
not more, because it's about coaching the parents through.
Brilliant.
Um, but yeah, if I do need to do a bit more or see a bit more footage, it's about finding what works. I think there's a really powerful story of a friend of mine who is
Yeah.
also a new parent. And when she had started her breastfeeding journey, she won't mind me sharing this story. She went, I think this is really important. She went to breastfeeding support in the community. She went to a lactation consultant before she said, "Oh, yeah, that's what you do, isn't it? Can you come round and have a look?" And that, what I always say is the difference, again, in what we will offer is that we will look at what your child is doing. We
Okay.
will look at the feeding dynamic and observe for any subtle things that we feel are not quite right so that we can change those. she said the difference, she said, if nobody watched my baby feed, all those people that I went to, nobody actually stopped to watch a full feed. They might have looked at her latch and gone, well, that initial latch and that first moment is fine. So
Yeah.
it must be you. It must be you. And she was told she had an oversupply. And I said to her, have you ever leaked? Have you ever had mastitis?
Yeah.
No to both of those things. I said,
Wow.
well, you don't have an oversupply then, because by default those things would be occurring. And then she said, and the issue was that the baby was getting really stressed at the breast. She was quite gassy, quite colicky, very uncomfortable. And when we watch the feed, it's really important to watch the full feed. So if
Oh,
you do, whoever you get support from,
yeah.
mums listening, whoever you seek support from, it's really important that you go to lactation consultants. They're great, but ask them to watch the extent of the feed, not just that first bit,
Okay.
and know how to advocate for yourself in that situation. Because when I was watching this baby, she could latch in the first instance,
Yeah.
but then as her mum's breast softened, as the milk started to drain, she then found that very difficult. She found the
Okay.
change in the breast and the nipple presentation difficult to hold on to. So
Wow.
there was some shift in the position, the shift in how she was held in order to make that latch more effective. And at that point, my friend was considering moving to the bottle because she
Yeah.
wasn't really sure how to continue. And within a week, she's back on her centile line, exclusively breastfeeding, and all of her gastro symptoms have resolved.
Amazing.
So
Just because you
subtle
watched
change.
the full feed and could
And
diagnose.
was that, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Wow. Because
yeah,
nobody watched my full feed. Now you come to say it. It was all about the latch.
yeah. So the latch might be okay for the first bit, but
Yeah.
what's going on throughout? How can your baby sustain? We get a lot of babies get really tired, and then they become what we call uncoordinated. So again, they might start well,
That's
but are
mad.
they holding on to that? Are they able to keep their breathing going, to keep their chest
Yeah.
clear? Because
So can I just ask, what was the fix for your friend in terms of when her breast, the milk went down? How did
yeah.
you help the baby then?
So we got her into a sideline position. So she was in like a cross, what's called like a cross cradle hold, and
Yeah.
she was basically like her tummy was on her mummy's tummy,
Okay.
and her head was like completely looking ahead, like
Yeah.
into her mum, rather than being kind of semi on her back. I don't know what I'm doing my arms, no one
I
can see
know.
what I'm
I
doing.
know what you mean.
um, and then we were able to manage because then she was in that position, we were able to get her into a much deeper latch.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
and she had the freedom to move her head, like I said, and the baby moving their own head into the position that works for them, to latch on in a much deeper way.
Wow. Right.
So she was able to hook what I would call hook right onto the breast. And then it meant that the breast was in a better position when it changed
Gosh.
shape.
Yeah, of course.
Because when the latch is shallow or you're not completely in line, any change to the breast position will
Yeah.
move the nipple. But if the baby is in that deep latch,
Yeah.
the nipple might shift, but there's not a lot of space for it to go. So
Yeah, of
it's
course.
more easy to sustain.
And you can see how that would make the baby gassy trying to go for that latch that the baby originally had. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really interesting and a really key point if anybody's sought help and not had the full feed watched.
yeah,
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 really
for sure.
interesting. Oh, well, I've absolutely loved this chat, Laura. I think it's been so informative, and I'm sure there's new mums out there that will have really benefited from this. So, your Instagram is Milk to Mealtime, isn't it?
Yep,
And what I'll
yep.
do is I'll put all your details in the show notes. So, if
Thank
anybody's
you.
listening that would like to get in touch with Laura, please do. I think she's got some amazing insights and knowledge on this. So, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think I was a listener and I do still check in from time to time to
Oh,
the podcast. And yeah, I just thought, oh, I wonder if there's a few mums that might want to hear what I have to say about feeding.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's
So
been
thank you.
really, really informative, and I'm sure there'll be mums out there that have really benefited. So thank you very much. I hope you found that chat as useful as I did. I'll be sharing all of Laura's details in the notes of this episode, so be sure to get in touch with her if you could do with some help in this area. As always, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to come on for a chat, be sure to drop me an email, the Nightfeed Podcast at gmail.com. Wishing you all a restful night ahead. Good night.